Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Woodburn Accountants and Advisors webinar series on market entry into China. Have you conducted a market research study or focus study group on your industry sector in China? Do you know the importance and value that a study can be for your China journey? Are you looking to enter China without setting up a company? Are you familiar with the benefits of a representative office? Are you familiar with how to set up a limited company in China? Woodburn Accountants and Advisors is offering a series of complimentary webinars on all of these subjects. And we hope by the end of this webinar series that we will have provided you with the information and tools to enrich your China business skills and enhance your market entry into China. Today is session 3 of this webinar series, and we're going to be looking at representative offices and the benefits that they may hold for your business in China. Before we begin though, let me just go through a couple of administration points. If you are located in any sensitive jurisdictions like China or the Middle East, it may very well be that you need to use a VPN to have a clear and stable connection throughout this webinar. As is very typical with a lot of webinars, being that they are online, there might be some instability. It usually takes always about 30 seconds to 45 seconds for it to reboot. So don't exit from the webinar. We will be coming back again. When you entered the GoToWebinar session, you have a choice of choosing your computer audio or a landline. Generally speaking, the landline always does provide you with better stability and clarity when people are talking, but obviously it is slightly more expensive than using your computer audio. However, if you are running into difficulties, know that you do have 2 options available to you. If you want to switch from your mic and speakers to the landline, just click in the audio section on telephone and you will get a dial-in number for your jurisdiction, an access code, and an audio pin. As is very normal with many of our webinars, we would like to always have a Q&A session, so please don't be shy. Add your questions and comments into the questions section of the control panel. As I said, it is a complimentary webinar series, so take the opportunity to ask what you would like to ask or comment on. Then, just to test the system, if you would be so kind as to click on the hand button in your control panel, that will allow me to know you can hear me and are actually listening. You can then re-click the hand button and it will disappear from your display. So just very briefly, for those of you that aren't familiar with Woodburn, Woodburn Accountants and Advisors is specialized in inbound investment to China and Hong Kong. We basically establish, manage, and administer companies on behalf of our clients in both jurisdictions. Our services range throughout a client's China journey. So our services range from everything from pre-investment advisory and market entry to actual implementation, to cross-border investment, tax optimization, corporate restructuring, M&A, etc. And obviously, with all of those more macro services, there are more in-depth services that underline them. All of our clients are international companies, all focused on entering the Asian market. All of them are doing a variety of things, whether it might be manufacturing in Asia, in China, whether it's exporting to the region, whether it's exporting from the region, or whether it's offering a variety of different services locally. A minor disclaimer, again, probably a bigger one than I normally do. I'm not a big fan of representative offices, so the presentation today might be a bit biased just from my point of view and my experiences, and I'll be sharing a little bit why I don't like them as well. But obviously I have to keep everything neutral, and I'll do my best to do that in today's presentation. But it is a general view. So I always find when meeting with clients and talking to clients, I do tend to try and move them away from the idea and thought of a representative office unless I truly believe that it is the most appropriate solution for them, both in the short and long term. It is a type of structure that is becoming obsolete in China, which is why I am not so positive about it. But let's get cracking, because for some industries and sectors, it is worthwhile to consider it. To put a voice to the face, my name is Christina Kohler-Coluccia. I am the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. I've been in the corporate services sector related to China since 2003. So I'm now 16 years in the game. My expertise is on China as well as on Hong Kong. And I've been helping companies not only with their market entry into China, but their expansion within the territory, their exit from the market, but also their expansion into other Asian countries from their local initial entities that they set up in Asia. It's always very inspiring for me and motivating for me to see clients succeed in the Chinese market and to accompany them on their China journey. So to begin with today's presentation, we'll be looking at the 5 benefits of setting up a representative office in China. And let's start off with the simple statement, which is very true, especially compared to 2003 when I first arrived in China. China is aiming to make it as easy as possible for foreign businesses to establish themselves in the country. The application procedures are by far more simplified than they have ever been. And it has been truly wonderful, especially for me over the last 15 and 16 years, to see that happening. The downside to any type of incorporation, I think globally now, is in relation to bank account openings. But I'll touch on that a little bit later, and I'll be certainly touching on that in tomorrow's presentation. But in terms of the actual incorporation process with the local government bureaus, whether it's the Industry of Commerce, it has simplified. It is much, much easier than it has ever been. And time-wise, it has also been picking up. So let's start off with the basics, because I don't know how many of you have done research on the types of entities in China, but I do want to start off with the basics because it will probably emphasize why I'm not a big fan of this type of structure. But let's get cracking. So what is a representative office? And I think this is a very important starting point because a lot of people make an interpretation that a representative office is like a branch office of their overseas company. In theory, it is. In practicality, it is not, because a branch office in general can conduct business in any jurisdiction and turn a profit. A representative office cannot. So a representative office in China it's a non-legal entity. It is completely 100% dependent upon its parent company from both a legal and a financial perspective. The purpose of a representative office is to solely act as a liaison office to the parent company. And it is extremely important to define what liaison actually means in order to make sure that the representative office is operating within its business scope. So I have actually created 2 things on the next slide, which is what can a representative office do? So the formal business scope that will go on the license of the representative office is the first one. It is market research, product display, and publicity activities relating to the foreign company's products or services, and liaison activities relating to the sale of products or provision of services, as well as local procurement of investments by the foreign company. Now, what a lot of companies don't do is define or open up a dictionary to actually see what liaison means. And this is where I get very worried by companies that are looking to establish representative offices. Because in the short term, you may very much want to have an entity in China just to have a showroom, just to display your products. But you will always have staff who do a little bit more than what is or should be done within a representative office business scope. A liaison office, by definition, should only communicate, cooperate, and facilitate working relationships between people, companies, and organizations. It cannot negotiate. So previously in the past, especially when I arrived in 2003, representative offices were the most common form of entity because, first of all, to set up a limited company in those days, you were restricted to certain zones, you were restricted on your business scope. Now, obviously, that's completely changed. But in those days, representative offices were the entity to use. And you would have companies with over 100 people all underneath the representative office. And obviously, the minute you have 100 staff, well, let's face it, the minute you have over 15 staff or even over 10 staff, you are doing more than just liaison work, right? You're doing actual operational activity. In those days, the form of those representative offices was primarily for sourcing in China. And you cannot tell me that the people that were employed by that representative office did not negotiate prices with the suppliers, did not do quality control inspections. All of this is operational activity. And it's the same with a sales concept or a service concept. A representative office cannot produce or deliver reports to any service-oriented business. A representative office cannot negotiate any sales deals. It can only communicate, cooperate, and facilitate, basically being an intermediary between the parent company and any of the working relationships or organizations in China. This is why I'm always very hesitant by people utilizing representative offices. Now, one industry that has, where I certainly do agree with the business scope, and I'm getting more and more of these types of inquiries, are overseas real estate companies who are looking to sell real estate projects to Chinese individuals or organizations. All they need is a representative office because all they're going to be doing is marketing initiatives. They're not negotiating, they're not doing any of this type. They're just trying to attract individuals to invest in properties overseas and probably organize trips to go overseas and meet with their counterparts that are over there that can actually facilitate and negotiate the real estate deals. So in this type of sector, I would be okay with the fact that a representative office is what the company needs and wants. In any other area, it's really wishy-washy, and you've got to be aware of that. However, if you do remain within the business scope and your aim is just to do market research, product display, and publicity activities, then by all means, go the avenue of the representative office. But just remember, if you want to increase those activities, you've got to think about having a limited company. So, let's face it, why set up a representative office in China? Well, for one, it is a very cost-effective way of breaking into the market. There's no share capital requirement. Operations are usually very small, under 5 people, as most of the resources are in the head office, right? So obviously the running costs of the rep office in China should be at a minimum. One of the key components, particularly from yesterday's presentation on utilizing partners to facilitate transactions in China, whether it's agents or distributors or licensees, is the fact that this is your first step to owning a company in China 100% and having complete control over that entity, over the employees, etc. And I do believe that representative offices are an extremely powerful marketing and promotional tool. And like I said, for a real estate company that is trying to market and promote real estate projects overseas, by all means, this is fantastic. But if you are looking to eventually promote and market products and physical services that you want to deliver in China, this might not be the entity for you. Now, the criteria to establish a representative office are extremely strict and stringent. The first one is something that has actually prevented a lot of people from utilizing this structure, particularly overseas startups. And it is the fact that the parent company must have existed for at least 2 years, meaning it must have been incorporated for a period of 2 years to be eligible to establish in China. This just goes to show that individuals cannot establish representative offices. There has to be a shareholding entity that establishes the representative office in China. The reason why they have created this 2-year period is because many people were purchasing shelf companies or immediately establishing companies in tax havens, like, let's face it, Hong Kong, Singapore, Jersey, Isle of Man, Seychelles, Mauritius, British Virgin Islands, only because they wanted to hire people in China and provide the visas, which then goes on to the next 2 points, which are pretty stringent, is the fact that a representative office must utilize what I had called yesterday a labor dispatch company, or otherwise known as a PEO company. You have to use them as an intermediary to hire local employees, for the main reason, again, that representative offices are non-legal entities, meaning that the full exposure of liability befalls the shareholding company. In addition to that, representative offices are limited to employing only 4 foreign employees, which in any case, like I highlighted yesterday, visa applications for foreigners are probably one of the biggest issues right now in China in terms of getting visas, getting visa renewals, etc. So it is extremely important to know whether you do need actually a foreigner on the ground or not. And last but not least, you definitely need a registered office address. So virtual office concepts in China are illegal. You do need a physical room number, and you need a room with 4 walls to constitute a registered office address. In addition, depending on some cities, Shanghai is not really the case anymore. The tier 1 and some of the tier 2 cities aren't the case anymore. You need to be located in a grade A or grade B building. In the tier 1 cities, you can be located in a grade C, grade D building as long as your landlord has the authorization to rent to representative offices. So leading off, so now I've given you kind of a picture of what a representative office is. What are the criteria and what it can actually do. Now, following from yesterday's presentation, which is looking at not having a structure on the ground in China and utilizing partners to start off your business, whether it's achieving one of 2 goals, hiring people or invoicing, going to a representative office at a minimum will show commitment to the market because you'll have your own office address on your business card. It'll show that you are getting more serious about the market. It will increase your brand image and profile. You'll have the ability to hire more people than probably what you were doing before. And most importantly, it will give these people the sense of stability and career progression within your organization. And I think the last 2 points are also the most critical. It is a starting point for you to be able to manage, control, and own a lot of the various things that you want to do to grow and expand within the market. So, for example, owning marketing platforms, probably owning your Chinese domain name, and just managing your business plan and your budget in terms of how you want to progress in the market. So the next stage is talking about the benefits related to the representative office. Why would you go ahead and utilize a representative office? So, I need to stay positive about these types of structures. So I've created 5 of these benefits for you to see. If you are a startup organization or a small organization with an extremely limited budget, then the advantage of China's representative office is the fact that there is no upfront share capital. What this basically means is that every month, so as soon as your representative office is open and the bank account is open, the parent company will remit funds directly into the account in order to pay off expenses. So you have to remember, the rep office is a pure cost center, and the costs can only be related to items that are within your business scope. So things to function and operate, but also things that are solely for marketing, travel purposes. Okay, there can be no transactional costs. There is no revenue. The only revenue is actually from the parent company. It is a pure cost center. So you have things like office rent, salaries and compensation, reimbursement of expenses to staff for travel costs. Obviously you've got internet costs, postage costs, courier costs, etc. You might have some marketing costs that will be funneled and paid directly from the rep office, primarily because your suppliers are asking you to pay in renminbi. That might be a trigger point why you need a rep office. So the advantage really is that there is no investment capital. You are basically bringing funds in month to month or quarter to quarter to just simply pay off the expenses. Okay. The next advantage is the fact that you can enter the Greater China region from a stable base. Obviously, the economies are still growing, particularly compared to other jurisdictions around the world. There's a very young demographic that is growing. And if you locate yourself in either one of the tier 1 cities or in some of the more high profile tier 2 cities, it is a perfect base for you to enter the region with the least amount of financial risk and commitment and start your business within the market. Don't forget also, I meet a lot of companies today where, yes, now is their focus for China, but tomorrow will be their focus for Asia. And Hong Kong and Singapore are jurisdictions that are unfortunately slowly dying, where people prefer to go into their operational jurisdiction to then go into the other Asian countries as well. So China is becoming a base to go into other Asian jurisdictions as well. Leading off from that, it is a strategic global location. And I highlight this because there are a lot of companies that are actually using China as service-oriented centers for the Asian region. If you think about it, 1/3 of the world's population lives in China. So you're definitely going to have the majority of your clients and suppliers in Asia, probably in China and in the surrounding region. So having at least a representative office to formulate, facilitate, maintain working relationships with clients and suppliers, it's very strategic, right? Maintaining relationships then with other clients and suppliers within the region, it's also a big advantage. The 4th reason to go with a representative office will be, quite frankly, the ease on the administrative processes as well as the auditing. So to set up a representative office is usually quite fast and efficient. It takes about 8 weeks to set up once all your documents are properly prepared. Whether you consider it an advantage or disadvantage, you will need to set up a separate finance function. As I said, representative offices are a cost center. You will have a bank account, and as such, you do need to prepare financial reports and submit audited accounts at the end of each fiscal year, which is the calendar year. In addition to that, you will need a bank account, obviously, in order to support all of the outbound payments in relation to costs and perhaps also petty cash transactions. From my perspective, I don't think there's any downside to having a separate finance function. I think it's important. In addition to that, you do need it because I think the biggest disadvantage related to the representative office is the fact that you do need to pay corporate taxes. So on the expenses that you spend, you will be paying corporate tax on that. And for me, this is also another reason why I am negative about representative offices, because from day one, you will be paying taxes on your costs. What the government, it probably sounds very strange to you that there's a tax on cost, but what the Chinese government is saying is that although the profitability is being generated and garnered in the head office, the representative office is facilitating that. And obviously, the more costs you have in that rep office, the more taxes you should be paying, because it's the assumption then that you are generating more revenue and earnings in your head office. So, they'll try to get tax out of you in any shape or form. Now, one area where clients, again, get into a lot of trouble is they try to minimize as much cost as possible within the rep office. So they'll probably try to take out all travel costs from the entity and put it just within the headquarter and have the headquarter reimburse staff. This is fraud, plain and simple. And the issue is that, the government is going down hard on any form of tax evasion or fraud, whether it's for rep offices or limited companies. So you just have to be aware of that. You can't cheat the tax system, basically. Compared to a limited company, it is definitely a low-cost entry into an exit from China. So, and I put exit as well for the following reason, that some people are also not successful in the market and as a consequence may want to exit. A representative office, it's easy to set up, it's quick to set up. There are just standard fees, applications, deposits that have to be paid. Acting as a cost center is very straightforward. You can, budgeting your costs is pretty easy compared to budgeting your revenue. And if you ever feel like you want to exit from the Chinese market, closing a representative office is much more simple and straightforward than a limited company. Closing a rep office usually takes between 9 and 12 months, whereas a limited company takes up to 2 years. Now, yesterday, I highlighted what would be potentially the trigger points from moving from a no structure in China model to moving to an actual vehicle that you would need in China. So I highlighted those trigger points. And I want to highlight again certain trigger points in reference to moving from a representative office to moving to a limited company. One of the things that I didn't highlight here was that tax is a component that is it's basically overlooked most of the time because people feel that representative offices, don't really pay tax. It's just tax on a cost center. However, if your business is growing and you have a representative office structure and you're going from 1 person to 2 to 5 to 7, your costs will increase. And as a consequence, your tax will increase. You do need to do a tax optimization calculation every 6 months to every year to understand whether savings could be made if you switch to a limited company. Maybe from day one, if you've just had 1 employee, the taxes will be minimal with a rep office compared to a limited company. But I can certainly create business models whereby the tax component will be much more efficient and optimized if you would go direct with a limited company. Now, again, disclaimer, tax shouldn't be the only component you look at when deciding what type of structure you should utilize to go into the market. However, it should be one of the components that you do look at. Another reason you may want to move from a representative office to a limited company is that it would be necessary for growth. You know, after some time with just a representative company, you may need to expand, right? You may need to tap into other growth opportunities. You may need to hire more people. You may need to invoice. You may need to take over more control over your business. And representative offices, as we have seen, are limited in certain aspects. For example, the number of foreigners you can hire, the fact that you can only hire mainland Chinese through a labor dispatch agency, you know, the tax component, the fact that you can't invoice. There are limitations to a rep office. So if it's necessary to grow, then you will have, I mean, that will be a trigger point for you to switch to a limited. The next reason is that growth might also mean diversifying into new products, services, maybe even sectors. And for mainland Chinese companies, doing so is an easy administration. For a rep office, it is impossible because obviously rep office have a predetermined business scope, which is really only market research, product display, and that's it, okay? So the only way to be able to physically trade and transact would be to obtain a business license that has that within your business scope. And the only forms of entity that have that would be limited liability companies. Now, at this point, I do want to highlight another disadvantage to the whole concept of setting up structures in China. If you decide to start off with a representative office and you've got extremely valid reasons and your belief is that within the next 5 to 10 years, a rep office will be sufficient for you to grow your business and sustain your business. But then you realize after 10 years that the rep office hasn't been sufficient and you need to now switch to a limited company. The problem is a lot of consultants use the word switch. In fact, in China, you cannot just switch. You need to, first of all, liquidate your representative office and open a brand new limited company in order to be able to then trade and transact. This is very complicated because every single entity in China, regardless of the type of entity, is required to have a registered office address. Only one company can be registered in one location, which means if you want to go from a rep office to a limited company, that's 2 entities, which means you can liquidate your rep office, but then you still need another address to pay for in order to be able to set up your limited company. In the meantime, where are your staff going to be based? This gets to be very complicated and complex. And this whole section is not changing right now in terms of regulations. So that is a complication that can occur if you do want to grow and move from a rep office to a limited company. The next reason is that it unlocks further recruitment potential, meaning you can hire more people, you can hire people by yourself without having to use a labor dispatch agency, meaning you can formulate secure and 100% valid employment contracts, as well as have employee handbooks as guidelines, particularly if you're looking to provide warning letters or termination. With rep offices, you have to go through the labor dispatch agency for everything, and there are always obstacles and blockages there. So it just allows you to have that flexibility to be able to employ yourself and grow if needed. The last reason, it's all about potential. In China, opportunities knock on your door very often. I don't want to say daily, but often enough. And obviously, you need to make your own analysis as to the return on investment for every opportunity that knocks on your door to know whether it makes sense and whether it's worthwhile. A lot of opportunities that knock on your door nowadays may require you to invoice locally. It may require you to have your own office. It may require you to do a lot of things. And you may lose out on these opportunities if you don't have a limited company. This is another reason why I'm always a little bit negative about representative offices, because there is consistent and continuous potential in the Chinese market. And to be able to attack those or to win bids, you will potentially need a limited company to be able to do that. So in conclusion, representative offices for sure are fantastic places to integrate into business life in China, and they often are a proven path towards establishing a business in this unique market. However, they are by nature limited, particularly in how they expand and how you can capitalize on the initial success of the market. So when it's your time to go to the mainland, have a business plan. Analyze that business plan over a certain period of time to see whether eventually you may need to transact, or you may need to hire more people, or you may need to accept certain opportunities. Make sure you create your budget accordingly and understand. And in your budget, do that tax optimization component. Understand whether tax-wise it makes sense to have a rep office versus a limited company, or vice versa. And don't forget, China is complicated enough as it is from a cultural standpoint that in terms of business and in terms of structure, you want something simple. You want something that will garner you freedom and opportunity to win bids or obtain opportunities, etc. You want to have something that's simple where you don't have to think so much about it, and it gives you that flexibility and freedom to move forward. And obviously, leading out from that point, I just want to highlight, tomorrow I'll be talking about setting up a business in China. And in that presentation, I will be doing an apples to apples comparison between representative offices and limited companies. So it will probably show you in greater detail what are the greater advantages of using a limited company versus utilizing the rep office route. So that's the end of today's presentation. I have a couple of questions that have come in, so let me just look through them very briefly. So one of the questions that's come in is, you mentioned that the rep office requires a bank account. What type of bank account do you need? That's actually a very good question, because bank accounts are difficult to open anywhere in the world, whether you're an individual or a corporate entity. Now, over the last few years, what I have found very interesting is that foreign banks in China, first of all, many of them refuse to open rep office bank accounts. So it may very well be that you are required to work with a local Chinese bank. Don't let that worry you. I'm a big fan of the local Chinese banks, more so than the foreign banks, because they can do so much more for you. It's just a matter of finding a branch office of the bank that will open the rep office account for you. Basically, what you have is just a settlement account in renminbi and in any foreign currency where your head office is remitting the funds, so US dollar, euro, pounds, etc. And then it's very simple from there. You'll also have online banking capabilities in order to be able to do online transfers. The next question is, you are obviously very negative about rep offices, and I've also heard that the Chinese government is not that keen on rep offices. Is this true? Yes, it is. The Chinese government would rather that you actually invest capital that is injected over a long period of time, so where the capital doesn't have to be paid in upfront, but paid over 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years. Versus going with the rep office route. I think what the Chinese government, as well as a lot of banks, feel about rep offices is that from their perspective, they need to spend more time and resources to follow up and maintain and make sure those entities are doing things legally, basically. And it just takes up more time and resources than actually focusing on limited companies that bring more to the country and to the prosperity of the country. So yes, it is true that the governments, they're not denying rep office applications, they're just not really very happy when you establish them. And certainly the banks aren't happy with it either. Another question that's come up, you've mentioned quite a few downsides to rep offices. Can you sum up what are the disadvantages? So to sum up the disadvantages of rep offices, I think, first of all, there's very strict criteria on them. There are limitations within those criteria. So for example, your parent company has to be at least 2 years old. You can only hire 4 foreigners, which usually isn't such a big deal anymore, but it's a limitation. You have to use a labor dispatch agent versus doing the payroll and the hiring yourself. So you have that additional cost as well. The other downside, I think, is really more from a business perspective and an operational perspective. I don't have a single rep office client that hasn't changed from a rep office to a limited company in their China journey. And that, I want to call it switch, or maybe a better word to use is that conversion from a rep office to a limited company, has always caused more problems and headaches and complexity for the company versus if they had just gone straight in as a limited company. I think also the biggest downside to a rep office from a business perspective is you win a project, your customer is asking you to invoice them in renminbi and issue a fapiao, and even though you have an entity in China, you don't have the ability to do that. And the time frame to set up a limited company is at most 6 months to 8-9 months, and that includes the whole bank account opening as well. So it's very time consuming, and as a consequence, you may lose out on that bid and that project. But like I said, tomorrow I will be talking more about the apples to apples comparison between a rep office and a limited company, so that you can see also more for yourself what are the advantages. And again, if you don't create your business plan, you won't know what structure fits you the best. So there are a few more questions that have come in, but I'm going to leave it there because they're very case specific, and I will answer you either at the end of today or by early next week. So please be patient on the response. Again, if anybody else has questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Contact me, contact our firm, and we'll be happy to come back to you. If you enjoyed our webinar series and you'd like to learn more about what we do and read our resources and publications and join other webinar series, then follow us on the various social media platforms or subscribe on our homepage to our e-campaign, which is sent out on a weekly basis. And last but not least, we have 2 more webinar sessions in this webinar series. Tomorrow I'll be talking about setting up a business in China, and then on Friday we have a guest speaker, Ms. Ting Zhang, who's going to be talking about converting opportunities to sales. So if you haven't subscribed to those 2 sessions, please do. And I hope to see you all again later on this week. Have a great afternoon and a good evening. Thank you and goodbye.